So when should the border between New South Wales and Victoria open?
Well, good morning. I think the key here is to make sure we do it in a staged approach. But there's no question that the communities on the border of New South Wales and Victoria, predominantly in areas like Albury and Wodonga, have become the human shield to protect the rest of this state. And in one way, they're paying the price and feeling the brunt of the border closure. And this is stemming from issues around education, medical, employment, jobs, businesses, and the mental well-being of this community. And that's why it's clear that while Victoria is the numbers getting stable, they're getting on top of their issue, we need to start looking at lifting some of the restrictions on this border almost immediately, and then plan for the complete removal of any border issues going forward.
So what is your idea of a staged approach? What would that involve?
Yeah, look, again, Pete, if you go back 7 weeks ago, we made a decision to lock down the border, and we had let's call it a bubble, a border zone that was quite wide, and it picked up a lot more of those communities. And the citizens within those communities were able to work within that border zone freely. Since then, we've gone even harder, and we've put in the permit system. That is causing much of the concern and angst at a local level. And therefore, for me, it would be going back to what we had originally, the larger border zone, allow the citizens of this region to traverse and work, play and live freely as a community. And if that all goes well, then I'd say you start staging where you open the border completely.
So this is all before Christmas. Is that your idea?
Well, my view is that this community can't sustain much more of this closure and the impact this is having on the community. We need to make some immediate decisions as early as next week to lift some of the restrictions, allow this community to act as a community. It's a number of cities, but there are one community. Anyone that lives in a border community understands the border it should be seamless. It's an invisible line. It's about service delivery, jobs, employment, and the way the community acts within that region. So that needs to be done immediately. And I think if the numbers in Victoria continue to fall, then definitely by Christmas we should be looking at a range of restrictions being lifted on the borders, but also in regional and rural New South Wales. It's not just the border. We haven't had any cases in regional and rural New South Wales, but yet we're punished in the same way of the restriction that we're seeing in metro cities. So I believe now is a time where if you've got issues in Sydney, in those local government areas, those hot spots, deal with those hot spots, but don't punish the rest of the economy and those citizens in those regions in regional New South Wales.
You've still got over 200 cases a day in Melbourne, though, at the moment. And as you know, as we all know, it only takes one case and then we're off again. It's out of control. So that's the problem, isn't it?
Well, it is, Pete. But the issue here is that this community has paid the price for something that they haven't actually caused. And what we need to understand, and the message I want to say, people that live in Melbourne have to start taking responsibility that not to travel to regional rural Victoria. And in Sydney, unfortunately, we've got to stop being selfish. We've got freedoms that we can go to a local pub, to the park, we can traverse, we can meet family and friends. But we're doing that at the cost of a border community, and that's unfair. And, at the height of our pandemic, 212 cases at the height in New South Wales, we never closed the border. Okay, we're down to a couple of hundred. There's risk. But even talking to Dr. Kerry Chant yesterday, she's optimistic about what has occurred in Victoria. Therefore, we very easily lock down borders. What is the trigger to lift? I'm saying the trigger is there now, even though there's a couple hundred cases. We do it in a staged approach and give this community the chance to have some freedom.
What about heading north to Queensland? When do you think Queensland should reopen the border with New South Wales, bearing in mind that we only had 5 cases yesterday? So it really seems as though the New South Wales tracing teams have done a very good job. So when do you think Queensland should do the same?
Well, again, I'd be a hypocrite if I was only telling Queensland and Annastacia Palaszczuk what to do if we didn't do something on the Victorian-New South Wales border. But I was up there a couple of days ago. Again, the impact that's having on that community and that economy. No cases in that region. that border should be lifted. And I said it on the day. The reason they haven't lifted that border, because it's actually there. The Queensland government and the Premier is working to an election timetable, not a timetable to support those communities, and that's disappointing. That there are no cases. Again, you do an extension of the bubble if that's the first step, but that border should be opened sooner rather than later. The data stacks up, backs that in, and unless there's no political will, we'll never see it. So let's see what happens at National Cabinet today. Of course, the Prime Minister hopefully put the pressure on state leaders to actually open up their borders.